Hey, what's up, folks? Realtor Chris Hall. Today I want to talk about inspections, and is there such thing as a pass or fail on inspection? And the short answer is no, there's no such thing as pass or fail. The best way to think of an inspection is it is a professional, detailed honey-do list of what is potentially wrong with that property. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video is I've had a lot of sellers recently that whenever the buyer sets the inspection up, the seller says to me, "Man, Chris, I hope we pass the inspection." And I try to tell them, like, there's no such thing as pass or fail. Now, there are some items that could potentially come up during inspection that will ultimately be the demise of that transaction, but most of the time that's not the case. And really what I've seen in the past 2 years is most homes that go back on the market, it's because of financing, or the vast majority of it is just buyers are getting cold feet. And we'll save why I believe that's happening for another video. But for today, let's talk about the inspection, right? So when the inspection is done, you have to determine, are you the seller or are you the buyer? So let's talk about what a seller can do to get their house ready for an inspection. Now, if you go back and you look at some videos I've done in the past, a few years ago, I did a video where it was 5 things you can do to get your house ready for an inspection. And I'll try to put it in the link or pop something up somewhere you can click on it. And basically, it's items that a seller can do before you go under contract that if you don't address them, it'll come up during the inspection. Now, sometimes a buyer will ask for it, sometimes they won't, but the less items that are on the inspection, it's obviously going to make the buyers feel better. And a lot of folks aren't aware of this, but in the 1 to 4 family residential contract, it actually has wording in there that says that the items that come up that need to be repaired, that are agreed upon to be repaired between the two parties, it's not exactly what this says. I'm just paraphrasing, folks. But it's just saying that if a repair comes up and the seller says they're going to do it, the seller has to hire somebody of that trade or a person with a license unless otherwise agreed upon by the two parties. Let's use like a plumbing situation. Let's say there's a sink and it's got some hair in it and it's draining slow. Probably pretty easy to fix. 99% of the time, if there's a slow draining sink, that's exactly what it is. There's some, hair or some stuff in there that's got it clogged up. But if you agree to repair it as a seller, most buyers are not going to say, "Oh yeah, go ahead and throw some Drano down it, and we'll be happy." Most buyers are going to want to have a plumber come out, take a look at it, and then as a seller, you end up paying a few $100s for somebody to pull some hair out of your sink. So I think it's a good idea as a seller to go through your home and try to determine, okay, let's fix that, let's fix this, don't fix that, we'll do this, before you go on the market to eliminate some of that headache when you're under contract. Now, as a buyer, you really want to break the items down into 3 different categories, right? So when I'm representing a buyer and I always show up at the very end of the inspection just so I know exactly what we're looking at. And I just like to help guide my buyers because it's a stressful situation. I mean, most buyers are pretty stressed out, especially in today's market. The inspection comes up, you get this big old booklet of everything that's wrong with the property, and it can be overwhelming and stressful and scary, like drinking from a fire hydrant, So what I like to do is let's chunk it up, break it up into 3 different sections, and then it's a little bit more manageable as a buyer. So the first one's going to be age appropriate, or what I call trivial items. And age appropriate. So let's say you have a home that's built in 1983 and you have a home that's built in 2019. Let's just roll with that. Let's say the home that was built in 1983 has original windows and 60% of the windows need to be replaced. That's not going to stress me out because that's kind of age appropriate if they're the original windows. But if you have a home that's, let's say, a year or 2 old and 60% of the windows need to be replaced, that's going to make me nervous. What the heck's going on with these windows? They're only, let's say 2 years old. So that wouldn't be age appropriate for, let's say, a home that was built in like 2018, 2019. However, a home that was built in 1983, probably age appropriate. So I wouldn't stress about it too much. And you should kind of know that going into the transaction because you'll be able to see the windows fogged up and all that. Now, the next section is going to be code changes, right? So once again, same scenario, home built in 1983 is probably going to be back behind on some codes versus a home that was built in 2018. So I try to explain to my buyers, like, don't stress about that stuff. It's just code changes, probably not a big deal. Sounds scary on paper, but it's probably not a big deal. Now, the last one is going to be items as a buyer you've determined you definitely want fixed. And then you have to determine, are these items worth killing the transaction? Meaning, if the seller comes back and says, "Hey, buyer, take a flying leap. You could take the home as it is, or you can go away." Well, as a buyer, you need to determine, Are these items big enough? Are these items worth the hill? Are these items the hill you're willing to die on during this transaction, right? And it's a good idea to determine this before you start the negotiation over the repairs. Make that determination and then roll with it, because as the negotiation starts, you'll start to get a little bit more frantic as a buyer, and then you'll end up doing something that you otherwise didn't want to do, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a gambler, you know, they kind of get all in and then they'll double or nothing, and you know what I mean. Like, they just make a plan before you go into it. So break it down into 3 categories. I'm going to repeat them real quick. So you've got age appropriate, trivial items, you've got code changes, and then you've got items that you definitely want to get repaired or would really, really like them to get repaired. Now, if you determine an item is worth walking if the seller doesn't repair them, then you have to determine, is it something that you want the seller to repair, or is it something that you want a credit for? And I'm not going to go into detail in this video on how to determine the difference, but it is a good idea to determine, hey, am I going to ask the seller for, let's say, $1,000, $2,000, whatever it might be. I'm going to ask that seller, hey, you cover, let's say, $2,000 of my closing costs, and I'll just address this repair when I move into the home. Or is it something that you want the seller to repair before you take possession of the property? However, with that being said, and this is how in the video, is you want to make sure whatever that item is it have the potential for a lot of surprises? Is it something that if the seller does it, can the seller kind of half-ass it? And if that's the case, you know, maybe you just ask for a credit, and then as a buyer, once you move in, then you can get that item repaired or addressed, and you can do it to a quality that fits your standards. Because let's face it, the seller, they're selling the home. They're just trying to fulfill the contractual obligation. A buyer's probably going to go a little bit more above and beyond because it's going to be their home. So that's the best way I found over the years to kind of break down the inspection, both as a seller and as a buyer, and then as a buyer to kind of break it down to make it a little bit more manageable when you're under contract. But as I said, there's no such thing as pass or fail. So if you're thinking about buying or selling, folks, I would love to help you. And until next time, have a great day.